A. About Frank Kepple. Before I let Frank take over, I thought I would provide a brief introduction to his background for those that may be unfamiliar with the man himself. Frank Kepple is an English researcher who has a long-term interest in the theory and practical application of astral projection and exploration, out-of-body experiences, and related areas of afterlife studies. He graduated in electronics and worked as a science consultant in industry for many years before taking early retirement in the south of France so as to more fully concentrate on his research. Frank first became interested in afterlife studies and the work of pioneering astral researcher and author Robert Monroe when he came across one of his books in a second-hand bookshop over 20 years ago. On a whim, Frank decided to read it as he thought that the author was either completely mad or onto something. Frank did not blindly accept everything that Monroe wrote, neither did he automatically dismiss it all. His scientific outlook led him to put Monroe's findings to the test by trying to replicate his work. Only then would he be satisfied that Monroe was indeed onto something. He never looked back. Not only did Frank replicate Monroe's work, he pushed the boundaries of Monroe's research even further. In recent years, Frank has spent a lot of time contributing to the Astral Pulse discussion forums, where he has provided a wealth of information and invaluable advice to many. One of his aims in recent years has been to set up a Frank Kepple Foundation in order to promote his own research, although this project has yet to be realized. Frank has since retired from online participation due to ill health, but it is hoped that this resource will provide a detailed overview of his research to date, so that people will continue to build upon his work in the future, just as he built upon the work of Monroe. Modern research into the wider reality is only just beginning. What follows is Frank in his own words. B. What is phasing and how can I do it? The term phasing was originally coined from an idea presented by the author Robert Monroe, who spent much of his physical lifetime researching OBE phenomena. His early work, detailed in his first book, Journeys Out of the Body, followed very traditional lines of study, such that strong parallels can be drawn between his experiences detailed in that book and the work of the traditional mystics. However, his later books, Far Journeys and Ultimate Journey, published many years later, reveal how his work had progressed to the development and formation of a completely different model of consciousness. His early locale concept had been totally replaced by a series of mental focus levels. These levels were labeled by using an escalating series of arbitrary numbers. Each level was identified from the mental impressions presented that Monroe categorized and labeled so that others could follow in his work and duplicate his experiences. At some point in his experience, Monroe was able to determine the profound truth that there is no separation within consciousness. Whereas in his early work, it felt to him he was leaving and separating from his physical body in the more traditional sense. His later experiences led him to conclude that he was not leaving his body at all. But what he was doing, in his words, was changing the phase relationship between himself and his surroundings. It was from this discovery that the term phasing came into being. Monroe was an electronics engineer by profession, and it so happens that I too graduated in electronics, so I understand where he was coming from when he talks about phase relationships. You can have two voltages present on the very same wire. You can have many numbers, but for this example, we'll have just two. To all intents and purposes, those two voltages are mixed, but at the same time they are separated. What separates these two voltages is the phase angle relationship between them. Monroe used this phase angle relationship idea as an analogy to describe the relationship between the physical or objective layer of consciousness and the non-physical or subjective layer of consciousness. Each respective area of consciousness occupies the same area in space, and to all intents, they are mixed, but at the same time, they are separated. So Monroe figured there was a 180-degree phase relationship between the two areas of reality. To him, projection became a case of switching phase between the physical and the non-physical. Phasing, therefore, entails initiating a 180-degree phase shift between the physical and the non-physical realms of reality. The way this is done is rather different from the traditional ways of initiating an out-of-body experience. In fact, phasing does not incorporate any kind of out-of-body feelings at all. The normal bodily vehicle can remain, and all that changes is a person's environment. The key to phasing is to just let the experience flow. You need to allow yourself to become it, as opposed to trying to go to it or point to it with some kind of method. Just lay back and simply become it. At which point people usually say, "Yeah, but Frank, it's okay for you, but when I close my eyes, all I see is blackness." Well, that is all I see at first. I think often that people are too hasty to discount these initial stages, and they just go off on some method. When I close my eyes, all I see is blackness. But I think the essential difference between me and many beginners is when they close their eyes, they are not really noticing. And that's another key to it, that of noticing self. I think people become too wrapped up in methods and techniques, and it prevents them from really noticing themselves. Okay, so as I say, when I close my eyes, all I see is blackness, which is normal. I'll wriggle around a bit to get comfortable. Maybe my knee is itching and my hair is tickling my ear or something. So I'll sort all that out and just concentrate on breathing gently for 5 minutes or so. Now, because I am noticing as opposed to avidly trying to perfect and follow some technique or method, in the traditional sense, my full attention is taken by the simple act of noticing. People often tell me that they keep trying, and they are saying about how they're concentrating upon holding their awareness outside of themselves, and at the same time they are concentrating on raising energy and doing everything correctly and whatever, but nothing is happening. That's right, because all their attention is fixated elsewhere, whereas all my attention is fixated on noticing. Noticing what? Well, nothing at first. There's not much to see really but blackness. But then after a short while, I may see that perhaps one part of the blackness is not quite so black. Perhaps there was just a brief flash of something, then maybe a sensation of a movement somewhere else. Maybe I just heard someone call my name. That's interesting, I might think. I wonder where that came from. But I don't get too curious, I just keep noticing. I might see swirling areas of not quite so black as the rest. I might see flashes of this and that. As I am offering myself these images, my attention is steadily becoming more fixated within. As my attention becomes fixated within from the act of noticing, at this stage I am not aware of my physical body. Part of my awareness realizes that somewhere in the background is a physical body, in bed, etc., but I have phased away from it. Before, the forefront of my awareness was my physical, and 180 degrees turned around from that. In the background of my awareness was the non-physical. But now there has been a phase shift, i.e. a turning through 180 degrees. Now my previous foreground, physical, is my background, and my previous background, non-physical, is my foreground. This is what is meant by phasing, because you cause a 180-degree phase shift between the non-physical and the physical. As I say, Monroe first coined the term as he was an electronics engineer, and he was picturing it like it were two voltages, 180 degrees out of phase with each other. Hence he coined the term phasing. But I guess people generally have difficulties picturing two voltages 180 degrees out of phase with each other. So instead, imagine a revolving door that is the entrance to a building. Any old building, it doesn't matter. You are standing outside the building. So the outside is your reality. You are aware of a reality that exists inside the building, but is closed to you by the door. Now go through and turn the door 180 degrees and stop. Oh, in case anyone doesn't know, there are 360 degrees in a circle, so 180 degrees is half a circle. Now, you are inside the building. So the inside is your reality. You are aware of a reality that exists outside the building, but it is closed to you by the door. Now again, go through and turn the door by 180 degrees and stop. So now the outside is your reality again. Each time you go through the door and turn through 180 degrees, there is a 180-degree phase shift between your awareness of the outside and your awareness of the inside in terms of your reality. Okay, so as my attention becomes fixated within from the act of noticing, this causes a 180-degree phase shift between my awareness of the physical outer and my awareness of the non-physical inner sense of reality. So from then on, I continue to notice anything that may come about. I'm not all that curious. I'm not trying to make anything happen. I'm not enacting some kind of method or technique. I'm simply looking within and noticing what is taking place. And the act of doing that is focusing my attention. As a person focuses their attention within themselves, through the action of noticing, they allow themselves to view snippets of other dimensions of reality. This action is translated objectively as the perception of flashes of all manner of this and that, random images that come and go, all kinds of spurious sounds, and so forth. Sometimes these snippets can form what I call astral screens, where you objectively perceive something similar to a cinema screen effect in front of your non-physical field of vision, complete with moving images and sounds. What is happening is that you're objectively offering yourself snippets of other dimensions of reality. If you then decide to step into these scenes, you will find yourself in that location, within that particular region of consciousness. I think ultimately what people who follow the phasing approach need to be realizing is the other dimensions of reality only seem to be objectively separated. But in reality, there is no separation in consciousness. We place a veil between the place we call here and the place we call there for the purposes of our experience. However, all these dimensions of reality are all affecting, entwined, and exchanging energy with us within every moment of our existence. It's just that we objectively choose not to view this action. By following the action of noticing, what you are saying to yourself is, okay, self, I would like to objectively choose to view this action for a while. There is plenty advice in books and online, which you can look at in order to find out more detailed information on the practicals of the phasing approach, so I will not go into additional detail here. What I feel is more important is to try to explain exactly what it is that we are phasing to. What is the astral world anyway, and how is it related to our physical world? What exactly is the wider reality? That is what I will attempt to explain here. Frank's model of the wider reality. 1. The wider reality, an overview of Frank's model. More traditional mystical approaches tend to refer to all the astral worlds, planes, and the like that are meant to exist beyond our physical world. The reality is that all these other planes, worlds, including the physical, are in fact part and parcel of one entire spectrum of consciousness, intertwined. I call the totality of our consciousness, when everything is included together, as the wider reality. As we are primarily focused on the physical world, we only really perceive the physical. This leads us to think that the rest of the wider reality is somewhere else. This is incorrect. The wider reality is in fact all here. The crucial factor is that we have chosen to focus our awareness into a specific area of that entire spectrum of consciousness for the purpose of gathering experience. Now, the wider reality is apportioned into 4 primary areas that I label Focus 1 to Focus 4 inclusive. You can call them what you like. The actual label you place is irrelevant. For ease of understanding, however, we need to call them something simple and logical. Right, so consciousness is apportioned into 4 areas. Someone asked me recently if there was anything beyond Focus 4, i.e. a Focus 5 or such like. The answer is, to my knowledge, within our particular system, there are just 4 primary areas. But consciousness doesn't end there. Consciousness is infinite. There may well be an infinite number of other systems, either like ours or perhaps wildly different. But let's just concentrate on the structure of our particular system and get people projecting properly with that first. Our system can be divided into Focus 1, Focus 2, Focus 3, and Focus 4. Together they form the totality of our consciousness continuum, or all that is, at least in our system. Each of us has our very own consciousness continuum that exists across these 4 areas. Okay, so here's one of the most important aspects you must understand. When I say there are 4 primary areas in our wider reality, I want you to fully realize beyond any doubt that these areas are not places. They are focuses of attention along your very own consciousness continuum. Monroe was a pioneer in this, and he was the very first person to my knowledge who realized that these areas were actually focuses of attention and not places. Hence the term focus in the focus numbers that Monroe talks about, such as Focus 10, Focus 20, etc. Why focus? You might ask. Well, that is the reason. Now, our wider reality is apportioned into 4 primary areas, and each person has what is called their primary focus. Anyone reading this within the physical, Focus 1, has their primary focus set to the physical. When we project, our primary focus does not change. We may shift our focus of attention, but our primary focus remains Focus 1. Think of your primary focus as your home focus, if you like. Say you visit a friend at another address. For the duration of your visit, the address of your friend's location has become the address of your location also. But that's only for the duration of your visit. Your home address remains the same. It's just that you've changed address temporarily. And that's what we do when we project. Our primary focus remains the same, but we temporarily shift our focus of attention to another area of our consciousness continuum. Throughout the time we are alive and kicking within the physical, our primary focus is focus one. Now, when a person dies, what we objectively view as death is an objective representation or translation of the person switching their primary focus from focus one to focus three of consciousness. You see, when you switch your primary focus, all subjective interaction with your physical body is stopped. In other words, the physical shell stops functioning as you shed it and go to live within focus three. This area is known as the transition area for various reasons. Now, I just want to say again that all this is not some weird and wacky theory I happened to dream up one day. What I'm saying to you is how it is, as far as I can tell. Everything I am putting across to you, I have experienced firsthand. With a little effort and a little practice on your part, you can experience it too. Ignore those that claim you have to reach a particular level of incarnation before you can access the higher areas. We actually occupy all of consciousness already. Every one of us has the exact same subjective structure. There is no such thing as any one person being more advanced than any other. In fact, the people who have the hardest or most difficult time in transition tend to be the highly religious and deeply spiritual types. They just get bogged down in their own belief constructs and end up trudging through the astral mud, as I call it. One of the great benefits of knowing how the wider reality is organized is when you die, you know exactly where you are and exactly what to do, rather than end up floundering in the dark not knowing anything. But there are many other benefits you can gain from this too while you are alive. Now, there are 4 primary areas, and your current primary focus is focus 1. I want you to also think of these primary areas as being intertwined with each other. They are not strung out in a big long line. They are all continually intertwined and connected. Remember, they are not places. For example, in the physical, you may be in one town, then you travel down the road to the next town. These areas are not like that. They are all intermeshed and intertwined with one another. Because of this, it is perfectly possible to objectively experience 2 or more primary areas at once, simply by tuning your focus of attention. You do not have to travel anywhere. Within the physical, we have time, space, and distance to contend with. But once you step outside the physical, there is no time, so there is no space or distance either. But that's not to say you do not perceive the idea of space and distance, coupled with a semblance of time passing. But these notions are mere legacies from having lived within the physical world and have no bearing in fact. Many people ask me how I travel from one area to the next. I don't, because there is no space to travel through. I used to have difficulty in navigating the wider reality. Then one day the penny dropped. The difficulties I was having were not because navigation is difficult. My difficulties were coming about through my failing to realize just how easy it was. I was trying to travel from point A to point B, as in the physical. In other words, I was trying to travel through space over a distance, and there is no such thing. Everything within the wider reality is contained within the same point. So if you are at one place, you are at all places at the same time. Because there is no space, that is why I say we each occupy all of consciousness already. The only difference is in your objective perception of your surroundings in terms of where, along your consciousness continuum, you are focusing your attention. And that comes right back to what I was saying on the outset. These areas are not places, they are focuses of attention. Are you beginning to see now why these areas are not places? So we all know focus 1 of consciousness. It is the physical. Focus 1 incorporates what I call the wider physical. This would include the region some call the real-time zone, or RTZ. Personally, I dislike using the term real-time zone as there is no such thing as real-time and it is not a zone. But then again, I look at this with a scientific air, and in science you have to be congruent as to the terms you use and get your definitions in order. To be honest, I can't see the point of projecting into the RTZ or the wider physical. Apart from the novelty value, There isn't much you can do, and it would appear a lot of effort for very little return. Because of that, we will start with Focus 2 of Consciousness. Focus 2 of Consciousness is what is commonly known by psychologists as your subconscious, but there is nothing sub about it. Focus 2 is where most people do their dreaming, lucid dreaming, their astral projecting, their meeting up with all manner of demons and devils, etc. Focus 2 of Consciousness contains all manner of personal faculties, such as your memory and your imagination. Without Focus 2 of Consciousness, we simply wouldn't be able to think rationally or create anything within the physical. It holds all our belief constructs that we happen to subscribe to. And it is this latter point that is rather interesting. You can actually project within Focus 2 of Consciousness and objectively view representations of your very own belief constructs that you hold. However, taking on board the fact that people typically think that this area of consciousness, to them the astral, is a separate place, the astral will actually become whatever you believe it is. This simple fact, unbelievably, has been the source of thousands of years of confusion as regards the wider reality. The problem has been simply that mystics have always thought they were projecting to some place outside of themselves. Yet what you are actually viewing within Focus 2 of Consciousness are the objective representations of your very own belief constructs. So if you actually believe the astral is packed full of demons and devils, then demons and devils you shall perceive. Because what you are actually viewing are the objective representations of your own beliefs. People have the idea that the astral is a weird and magical place where you get all manner of Alice in Wonderland effects, such as your thoughts coming to life. Many mystics just accept this as a given and lead people into thinking they could possibly meet up with all manner of doom, gloom, and danger. But do these people ever stop to think, even for a moment, why their thoughts come to life? Why there is such a thing as an Alice in Wonderland effect? It is only when you look at the situation from the point of view of a scientist trying to objectively make sense of it all that you realize the simple reason of why this effect comes about. For almost 5 years, I battled with this question. I fought all manner of demons and devils and slayed dragons galore. Then one day the penny dropped. I realized that thought equals action. That was it. I was in a place where thought equals action. I remember the time distinctly even to this day around 18 years later. But it was only much later when I realized precisely why thoughts equaled action in this weird and wonderful kind of place called the astral. Why did thought equal action? Simple, it was because I was projecting into my own mind. In other words, I was offering myself the objective knowing of my very own internal subjective actions. This simple realization led me on an amazing voyage of discovery through my very own mind. It was truly fascinating as I learnt to know myself from the inside out, so to speak. Wow, if I had a problem, I could now step right into myself and find a likely solution. Plus, it was from this realization that I got to know about the way the subjective and the objective translates both in terms of awareness and in terms of energy. This latter discovery has since helped me to make some very profound realizations about the wider reality. Focus 3 is even more interesting. This area of consciousness is a collective term that incorporates all of Monroe's Focus 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27 areas. This region features all the hollow hells, hollow heavens, and everything in between. Monroe's Focus 27 represents the upper level of my Focus 3. Focus 3 is where we all go when we die, i.e. after physical death, our primary focus switches from Focus 1 to Focus 3. Focus 3 is also known as the transition area, for reasons which will be explained in due course. Focus 3 is what I call a common area of our consciousness continuum. This means that unlike Focus 2, which is ours alone and can only be experienced by ourselves, our Focus 3 area of consciousness intertwines with everyone else's. We can all share in each other's Focus 3 areas of consciousness and interact with each other. As you step into Focus 3, then you will find that it is much like the physical is. Here you can meet people in a totally objective sense, exactly as you can while physical. Within this region, it is obvious these people are not merely creations of your own imagination. It is as obvious as it is apparent that other people are not merely creations of your imagination within the physical. There are billions of people on the mid to upper branches, all interacting with each other in an objective sense, just as we all do within the physical. The upper branches of Focus 3 are very physical world-like, indeed, even better, in fact, on the topmost branches. In my mind, I call it the supra-physical, sort of like the physical on steroids. In Focus 3, you will find an almost infinite variety of different environments that people have created for themselves to live in, either knowingly or unknowingly. Many of these environments are wonderful and beautiful. Some are boring, and others are horrific. When people create objects and environments in Focus 3, these things remain until removed, so it is possible to turn up at a location long forgotten about by its creator. It may even have other people hanging about in it. You could even stick around here and add your own touches if you like. Creating things in Focus 3 is slightly tricky as it involves the subjective creation process, but with practice you can get the hang of it. Note, one of the most fundamental rules of the wider reality that you must take on board is the rule of like attracts like. This is important in order to understand the myriad worlds of Focus 3. After physical death, people with similar beliefs and values will tend to gravitate towards the environments in Focus 3, populated by those of similar beliefs. Their collective beliefs created these areas. Furthermore, they will tend to stay there until they have a fundamental shift in beliefs and/or values, at which point they will move on to higher regions of Focus 3, where people are more free-thinking. These upper areas of Focus 3, where people are happily free of dogmatic beliefs, are the regions labeled Focus 27 by Monroe. The number of environments in these upper reaches of Focus 3 is huge, but here you will find many of the environments described by Monroe, such as the park, the Life Review Center, and so on. Just to clarify, Focus 3 is huge. So say I have had experience with 2,000 people on the lower branches, as I call them, of the Focus 3 tree. This 2,000 may account for 10% of people, highly unlikely, 1% or 0.000000001%, perhaps looking more likely. I really have no way of knowing at this stage. There is so much to explore here. Focus 4 is the real mind blow. This is the top end of our continuum of consciousness. It is pure subjective energy. When we engage with Focus 4, we become our wider selves. This is the end goal of Focus 3. This is why Focus 3 is also called the transition area. Focus 3 allows us to prepare at our own pace, be it centuries or thousands of years in some cases, for our eventual primary switch to Focus 4. Primary Focus 4 of consciousness is the subjective source of all the actions in consciousness. You see, the energy for our actions has to come from somewhere. We don't just create something from nothing. An idea, for example, is an action in consciousness. It is energy with a particular direction, you could say. Now that energetic action had to be sourced from somewhere, in the sense that the raw energy didn't just come from nowhere. When we look at ourselves in terms of energy, what we are is essentially a human energetic transducer that converts raw subjective energy into objective becoming of all manner of description. When we project within subjective reality, each of us typically places ourselves in the position or anticipation of facing objects. But when you enter Primary Focus 4, you cast off all notions of things and begin merging with the underlying subjective energy. That same energy, down the line as it were, will ultimately split off here and there, again all in a manner of speaking, and create a thing. That thing could be a soccer ball, a human being, a house, a plant, a giraffe, or whatever. Now, in merging with energy, I do not mean you are merging into a vast pool of nothingness. On the contrary, typically you are merging with a specific action of energy. I suppose you could say, in a very broad sense, and only in a very broad sense, you are merging with a thing, but a thing in terms of its conceptualization, or its source, in other words. And that source of all that is within our system, is Primary Focus 4 of consciousness. So ultimately, all things can be traced to an action in energy, the ultimate source of which is Primary Focus 4. So you could say that Primary Focus 4 is the area of the action of the thought before it is created. But again, only in a manner of speaking, because from the Primary Focus 4 standpoint, there is no before. All simply is. The concept of before comes into it as the action is engaged further down the line, as it were. I freely admit that I, for one, do not have the full answers. I will not get them until I can take in the full picture of Focus 4 of consciousness. I'm not even sure whether it is actually possible for a physically focused individual to take in that full picture. Focus 2 and Focus 3 are easy by comparison, as they are so Earth-like or human-like, and people have usually just made something up for the rest. In the olden days, they called it God, in significance of all they couldn't explain. But technology moves on, our understanding widens, and this topic is no different. Today, we are attempting to broaden our understanding and pave the way for the new paradigm. So here we're calling it Focus 4 of consciousness, an area in consciousness that we can now learn to experience for ourselves with a little effort in the right direction, of course. Now, anything involving Focus 4 of consciousness is completely mind-blowing, and I do not say this lightly. It is an area I have not been able to explore as fully as I would like. It is my current challenge, you could say. The big difficulty with Focus 4 is that it's an area of fully subjective reality. There's no notion of time, so in turn there is no notion of space either. Focus 4 occupies no space at all, and yet it encompasses the other areas, namely Focus 1, 2, and 3. So our whole physical universe and all the other universes besides, but let's put them aside for a moment, is encompassed by Focus 4. Yet outside of Focus 4, there is nothing, because Focus 4 encompasses all that is within our system. Focus 4 occupies no space, yet it encompasses our whole physical universe. Okay, so that's the first hurdle. Problem is, to us, if something occupies no space, then it cannot possibly exist. Reason being, we are so attached to things. Second hurdle. To understand Focus 4, it is necessary to take on board an understanding of infinity. This latter aspect is perhaps the most mind-blowing of all, because in infinity, everything happens an infinite number of times, which means everything that has or will come about has already happened. From our somewhat limited linear time perspective, we may consider a life began, it ended, and it began again. But from the perspective of Focus 4, nothing has begun and nothing has ended. The whole notion of beginning and end is a physical construct. The good news about all this, of course, is that there is no true end, and there is no death. There is only ever-expanding consciousness. When you actually step within Focus 4 and experience it for yourself, all begins falling into place. Well, that is what is steadily happening to me. And I cannot be the only person in the world today who has stepped into Focus 4 of consciousness. I realize this kind of thing is quite rare, and hopefully it will start to become more common as people begin duplicating my work. 2. How Frank's model correlates with Robert Monroe's. I have built upon the pioneering work of highly regarded astral explorer and author Robert A. Monroe. My own experiences equate with those of Monroe in many key areas, but as with any kind of ongoing research, I found that I soon had to modify Monroe's findings in order to take account of my own research and personal experience. So how does my model equate with Monroe's? Well, in most ways they sit very well together. My model can best be viewed as a simplified version of Monroe's, but with additional features which are due to discoveries made by me during the course of my explorations. For those familiar with Monroe's system of labels, here is a basic comparison as far as possible. Monroe's Focus C1 equals my Focus 1. Monroe Focus 3, 10, 13, 12, 15, and 22. Monroe Focus 23, 20, 25, 26, and 27 equals my Focus 3. Here the comparison ends, as my Focus 4 has no Monroe counterpart. More on Monroe's Focus 21 state. Those familiar with Monroe's model will be aware of the Focus 21 state. This state is also known by many astral explorers as the 3D blackness state. You know when you arrive at this state, as the black field of vision in front of you becomes completely 3D, and you find yourself floating freely within it, rather than just observing it in a 2D fashion. As you can see, it lies right at the top end of my Focus 2, and it borders on Focus 3. The 3D blackness state, or Monroe's F21, is what can best be described as a bridge state. This state can be viewed as the point at which your individual mind meets the wider astral, i.e. the state where your individual consciousness continuum, Focus 2, meets the common area of your consciousness continuum, Focus 3. It is the jumping off point for all adventures in Focus 3, or the astral proper, as some people call it. I decided to use the label Focus Z, as in 0, to describe this state as it is unique in the wider reality, and seems to deserve a label of its very own. During the phasing process, people will pass through this state on their way to F3, but many people are unaware of it as they tend to flash through it so quickly. This is a shame, since the FZ state is quite awesome in its own right. You can simply relax and float peacefully through the black void, just chilling out. Another thing you can do is to call forth any piece of music you care to think of, and you will hear it all around you in glorious surround sound. You can also form astral windows in this state, which will display any particular scene you care to think of in glorious high definition. You can use this as a jumping off point into F3 if you like. All you need to do is will yourself to step into the scene, and there you go. There is likely to be plenty more to discover about the FZ state, and further exploration is warranted. In-depth, Focus 1. As stated in the summary, Focus 1, labeled by Robert Monroe as C1, is what we usually refer to as the physical or material world. For the duration of our physical lives, our primary focus remains Focus 1, F1. Anyone reading this within the physical, Focus 1, has their primary focus set to the physical. When we project, our primary focus does not change. We may shift our focus of attention, but our primary focus remains Focus 1. This means that it takes a bit of effort to temporarily shift our focus of awareness to other focuses, like F2 or F3, or F4 if you are really ambitious. After physical death, our primary focus will switch to F3, that will be our home focus, while we go through the transition phase, which will eventually allow us to make the permanent switch to F4. At this point, F4 will become our primary focus once again, and the cycle is complete. F1 encompasses everything that we regard as physical, the world, the galaxy, and the entire universe. If you want to know who created the universe, I have been reliably informed that it was us. The purpose of the physical universe is to experience objective reality. At some point, we got together from a Focus 4 perspective and decided to create a common pool of subjective energy that would manifest itself objectively in the form that we recognize as the physical universe, the purpose of which is to provide an excellent means of gathering experience. We are here to experience, and being physical in an objective sense is a wonderful way of doing so. The physical world can be thought of as condensed subjective energy manifesting in an objective manner, and in creating it, we set up a series of rules surrounding this energy. The result is, of course, the material principles of the universe and what we understand as physics. One of the most useful aspects of the physical world is that being physical shields us from the worst effects of subjective expression. With regards to the wider reality, if you think about something, you will release subjective energy. Do this enough and the desired effect will manifest. This causes problems for those who are in a poor state of mind. The lower levels of F3 are awash with people who are stuck in their own self-created hellholes due to an ever-increasing spiral of negative energy. For example, someone who creates a terrifying situation for themselves then results in them becoming even more terrified, resulting in ever more terrifying situations, and on it goes. In the physical, this doesn't happen. The equivalent to this scenario is what we call a nightmare. This is a fear-generated scenario created in F2 while our bodies are resting. However, if the scenario becomes too terrifying, then we wake up, i.e. return to F1 where these energies have little effect. However, when our primary focus has switched to F3, we have nothing to stop us, and it is possible for us to get caught up in all manner of negative scenarios, all of which provides the retrieval experts with plenty of work. To put it another way, in F3, if you will a can of beer to appear in your hand, then it is possible, with a bit of practice, to make this happen. In the physical, you can sit in your armchair and think about that beer in the fridge until the cows come home, but it won't appear in your hand until you get off your ass and go and get it. I should point out here that recent exploration has provided me with evidence that our desires and mental attitudes do directly influence our physical reality to a far greater extent than previously thought. Indeed, our physical circumstances are directly linked to our particular desires and attitudes. This means that with the right intent, you can change your physical circumstances accordingly. At present, I am still only at an early stage of exploration in this important area, and much additional research is needed. However, even with this being so, It is clear that the norms surrounding physical reality do shield us from the most immediate and direct aspects of the thought equals action principle, which governs the wider reality, or astral world as others call it. This leaves us free to engage in all manner of experiences, all of which ultimately lead to our enrichment. That is, after all, the purpose of life, to live and to experience and to grow. Some people question the notion that our primary purpose in physical existence is to experience, for if that is so, then this seems to justify or belittle all the horrible things that happen in the world and allow us to pass them off with, well, it's all experience and is therefore all good. Actually, I am not saying this. There is no excuse for any kind of suffering. It is true that we are here to experience, but that does not mean that we have to experience horrendous suffering, or that suffering is somehow good. The fact is, the physical world offers us a plethora of possible experiences, so many in fact that there is no need to immerse ourselves in endless horrific situations just for the hell of it. Our most innate natural state is in fact one of joy, peace, and comfort. To experience the opposite to any great extent is not healthy. In fact, the only useful aspect of experiencing agony and suffering is to learn how not to experience more agony and suffering. These are not naturally desired states and should be avoided if at all possible. Of course, the nature of the physical world and its freedom of action can make this impossible, as we are emotional creatures after all. We can all expect our fair share of pain, but there is no excuse for encouraging these negative aspects. The best we can do is to focus on the love and positivity that can arise from such painful moments, providing we give them a chance to do so. We should do our best to encourage an end to suffering everywhere. Astral projection out-of-body experiences. One thing I want to make clear concerning what is normally called out-of-body experiences is that this name is actually incorrect. The fact is, we already occupy all of our consciousness continuum to start with our primary focus being centered along a certain part of it, i.e. F1, F3, or F4. With regards to F1, we are primarily focused on our physical bodies, and we perceive and interact with the physical world through them, but we are in no way inside our bodies. When we project, we are temporarily shifting our focus of awareness from F1 to wherever we are not leaving our bodies as we were never in them in the first place. With regards to exploring the physical while in an out-of-body state, in such a state, what we are therefore doing is not leaving our bodies, but focusing away from them. Now, in doing so, we can continue to perceive the physical world as a point of consciousness, but it can be difficult to navigate and to perceive properly if we're not used to it. So to make things easy, we can usually automatically create an energy double to focus on and use to navigate and perceive things around us. This is the so-called ethereal body or astral double that people talk about. The ethereal body only exists for as long as it is needed, and it is then dissolved when we refocus back on the physical body again. This energy body can take many forms depending on the expectations of the projector. However, they are not necessary in order to focus away from the physical, but are a common feature. The term astral projection, on the other hand, is normally used to refer to trips to the astral world, or what I call F2 and F3 states. In F2 or F3, the process of body creation is the same, although it is much easier for people to create bodies for themselves, and they feel much more real than the temporary second bodies created for the duration of a physical projection. While people permanently engaged in F3 can adopt whatever form they wish, most people appear to automatically adopt the form of their previous physical existence, but as it was at their physical peak, i.e. 25 to 30 years old. This is somewhat of a generalization, but it tends to be most common. One other point to note is that it is our continued desire to remain primarily focused on the physical, which keeps our energetic connection with our physical bodies intact and keeps our physical bodies alive. As soon as we permanently switch our focus, then our link with our physical bodies is broken and the physical body dies. To put it another way, the body is not the source of the mind, nor does it sustain the mind. The reality is that the mind sustains the body. As soon as the mind decides to disengage permanently, the physical body will die. The real-time zone. When talking about physical projections, people often talk about the physical world and a buffer zone next to it. This buffer zone is like an exact parallel of the physical world and is where we project to when navigating the physical world in a non-physical manner. I used to accept the notion of a buffer zone between the physical and the astral, but no longer do so. I now believe that what we call the buffer zone or real-time zone is in fact all part and parcel of the physical world. It is just that focus one, or the physical, is made up of a lot more than what we perceive from a normal physical perspective. I suppose we could call this the wider physical. You have not actually gone out of body at all. You have simply taken a step back, so to speak, from the frontline physical in terms of your current focus into the wider physical. You cannot go out of some place where you were never in the first place. If someone moves their location from point A to point B, this logically presupposes the person was actually at point A to begin with. If I want to go out of one room into another room, I have to initially be in that first room. In terms of the body, we are not located in that first room. We are merely focused within it, as if from a distance, if you like. The analogy falls down rather quickly, but imagine looking into room 1 from a distance through a telephoto lens. Then you shift your focus to room 2. In a sense, and only in a sense, this is what we're doing. Reality fluctuations. Projectors often talk about reality fluctuations when involved in a RTZ projection. For example, you may be floating around your room, looking down at your body, and everything appears just as it was when you were physical, except it was dark outside and now it is light. Hold on, the door is in the wrong wall. These fluctuations are not really fluctuations, they are overlays. You see, F1, F2, F3, and F4 don't sit one on top of another in a nice, organized, linear manner. The reality is that they all intertwine together, much like several strands of string bound together to form rope. You can experience F1 and at the same time experience an overlay of F2 or even F3. This is how I expect mystics have their visions. They experience an F2 overlay of Jesus or whoever, and this is on top of their F1 experience. The end result is seamless, so you would in effect see Jesus walking around in front of you in the parking lot or wherever you were having your vision. Ghostly manifestations may also be a result of overlays, perhaps F1, F3 overlays, allowing the witness and the ghost, i.e. someone residing in F3, to perceive each other. Overlays, or fluctuations, as they are more commonly called, can be kept to a minimum with practice. You need to practice keeping your mind as focused and emotionally neutral as possible during physical projections, and eventually you should be able to observe your RTZ'd surroundings with a good degree of accuracy. Paired versus the wider physical is a very interesting area which I'm just starting to get to grips with. When you are exploring the wider physical, you come across all manner of tubular structures, astral gateways, and all manner of weird and wonderful entrance structures. I now believe that at least some of these may lead to other parallel physical universes. There is not just one universe you see. While ours is vast enough, it would appear that we created many other parallel physical universes as well. Some are very similar, and others are wildly different. I am now of the opinion that they all exist very close to each other, but on different vibrationary levels. It is perfectly possible to travel between what are commonly called parallel universes. A seasoned projector can do this, though not in the physical sense, yet by traveling along the myriad of tubular structures that link all the various different realms of physical reality universes. I suspect this underlies Monroe's F-35 experiences, described in his book. I have never found an exact parallel for F-35, and I believe that he may have actually arrived at a crossroads of parallel physical dimensions. However, instead of these crossroads residing somehow beyond F-27, these parallel worlds may in fact interact at a much closer level, somewhere in the wider physical level, or what we call the real-time zone. Like many aspects of the wider reality, this area requires further study. Opportunities for providing proof. As I always say, the only way a person can prove experiences to himself or herself is to gain knowledge of an action that is unconnected with themselves. Physical projection, once mastered, is an excellent opportunity to get some. For example, in one RTZ projection I had fairly recently, I was outside and saw a large van making a delivery to the bakery. I popped back to physical, threw on some clothes, walked down the road to the bakery to check, and there was the van. This is just one example, But once you have done this kind of thing a few times, residual doubts about your experiences will soon be dispelled. 4. In-depth, Focus 2. The region of your consciousness continuum that I call Focus 2 is very interesting. Unlike Focus 1, 3, and 4, this area of your consciousness can only be experienced by you. It is an area of individual consensus reality that nobody else has access to apart from you. Focus 2 of consciousness is the next area inwards, so to speak, from F1. Now, anything that ever has or ever will come about within Focus 1 originates within Focus 2 of consciousness. This is the area of a person's imagination. It is where all ideas come about, all impressions, gut feelings, etc. Each and every manifestation that is brought into being within Focus 1 OC, absolutely all of it, every invention, every design, every piece of art of any description, etc., without exception, originates within Focus 2 of consciousness. Focus 2 OC is the place the olden day explorers termed the Astral. It is perfectly possible to enter this area and engage in whatever belief construct you like in 3D. It's the place where most of us do our dreaming. If a person develops a degree of lucidity while they are dreaming, then this is where they will have a lucid dream. If they purposely enact some kind of projection technique, then they can often enter this region with certain expectations, which will pan out as an astral projection experience, as opposed to a dream or lucid dream. But these actions are all essentially the same. All that changes is your level of awareness and your expectations. The key fact about engaging with F2 is that all your belief constructs will be represented in front of you in glorious 3D. As F2 is divided into many areas, which all hold different beliefs, thoughts, memories, and experiences from your life, you can engage with these belief constructs as you wish. There are tremendous joys to be had here. Myself, I love running through all my childhood memories, for example. Anything you ever felt, saw, experienced, etc., in your life, you can relive again within Focus 2 and in stunning detail. Absolutely anything and everything your physical senses have ever experienced, and I mean that literally, is recorded by your senses and stored within Focus 2, plus all your dreams too. F2 is where you do your dreaming every night, so you are actually well used to this area. When engaging with F2 worlds, you will find that the characters there can be quite limited in their range of abilities. This is because they are constructs made by you. Dream characters are a typical example of these constructs. When you are in a dream state in F2, your awareness is usually pretty restricted anyway, usually to the scenario depicted, so you don't really notice. If you enter an F2 area while fully aware, you will soon notice something odd if you try to engage these characters in meaningful debate or try to get them to do something other than what they were doing. They come across as being a bit vague and not quite all there. This is one of the biggest differences between F2 and F3. Some people ask how I can tell the difference between F2 dream characters and real people in F3. Don't worry, you will be able to tell. People in F3 engage in a whole range of actions, communicate with you directly in meaningful dialogue, and act in ways that you could not predict, just as they do in F1 physical. This will become obvious to you once you gain a bit of experience of F2 and F3 environments. I should point out that although this is your own personal area and cannot be experienced directly by others, it is still possible for someone to communicate with somebody else in an F2 state, such as a dream, for example, which is just F2 with restricted awareness. Someone else from outside, say F3, can try to communicate telepathically, and this communication will hopefully manifest itself in the F2 experiencer's world, perhaps even as a representation of the communicator. With any luck, the communicator may even succeed in raising the F2 experiencer's awareness to an F3 state, resulting in full face-to-face contact. This can happen in a seamless manner and is another example of overlays in action, in this case F2, F3. This is how it is possible for those who have passed over, to use the old terminology, to communicate via dreams with those still residing in the physical. This is about as far as those olden day inner explorers went. Some of them tried to venture beyond F2, but by and large they were captured by their superstitions when they came across the 3D blackness or FZ area. Getting lost or getting mutilated by some monster hidden in the dark recesses of the void was a big thing in those days. The tales of which would be filed alongside all manner of other scary facts, such as, If a person traveled at more than 15 miles per hour, their physical body would fall apart. But these days, the more forward-thinking practitioners realize this infamous void of old is just an area of 3D blackness situated between focus 2 and focus 3 of consciousness. To followers of the Monroe school, the void is simply the 3D blackness at focus 21. Simple as that. No superstitious nonsense getting in the way. Just place your intent and away you go. So when you take off into the 3D blackness, you generally emerge within focus 3 of consciousness, or what is becoming commonly known as the transition area, where you will come into contact with other people who are very real indeed, not just F2 dream characters. It is to F3 that we will turn our attention to next. 5. In-depth, focus 3. Now, if you shift your focus of attention to focus 3 of consciousness, please understand that you are still not in a separate place. You are still within your own consciousness continuum, but focus 3 is an area of common consensus reality. So things are very much like the physical, indeed even more physical than the physical if you know what I mean, like the physical on steroids. As it is a common consensus reality, like F1, it means that you can perceive and interact with everyone else and they with you. Just as in the physical, this is where people go when they die, i.e. make the primary focus switch from F1 to F3. F3 is also known as the transition area, as it is where we all go in order to begin the process of adjusting back to subjective reality once again, and to prepare for our eventual primary focus switch, back to F4. This is the ultimate purpose of focus 3. How long this process takes to complete will vary from individual to individual, and everyone progresses at their own pace. Some people can take hundreds or even thousands of years. In our terms, there's no rush. This level equates to Monroe's F23 to F27 areas. Focus 3 is big, and I mean huge. You could probably spend thousands of years exploring this area and only manage to cover a fraction of it, with new additions and changes occurring all the time. The fundamental rules of the wider reality are readily apparent here in that thought equals action and like attracts like. This means that people of similar mindsets will tend to gravitate together with others of a similar persuasion. The subjective energy of these groups then allows for the creation of environments suited for the groups in question. Although I should also point out that you often get individuals living in some environment by themselves. This is because they have chosen to do so, or expect to, depending on their expectations on crossing over. As I said earlier, F3 is also known as the transition area, as it is where we all go after physical death, when our primary focus switches to F3 instead of F1, in order to begin the process of adjusting to subjective reality once again, and for our eventual primary focus switch back to F4. This process proceeds at each individual's own pace, so we could be talking hundreds or even thousands of years for some people. The whole process can be hampered by the fact that many people may not know that they have died, or they may have strong religious beliefs, which means that they spend years in some created heaven of their own expectation, along with others of similar beliefs. They only remain in these scenarios for as long as they hold these beliefs, so once they begin to have serious doubts about their heaven, then their energetic structure will change, opening up other possibilities for these people, and a chance to engage with a more free-thinking area. All the heavens of mainstream religion can be found here, as well as all the hells. These are all scenarios created by people's beliefs and expectations. If they really believe that they will be going to hell, complete with fire, brimstone, and fork-wielding demons, then that is where they will end up, suffering alongside others of similar persuasion. Like any F3 scenario, however, at some point they will begin to question what in Hades is going on, and if this thought process goes on, then the penny eventually drops, allowing them to leave. Afterlife researcher Bruce Moen calls all these self-created afterlife scenarios hollow heavens and hollow hells, to highlight the fact that they are created by us due to our own expectations. We are not governed by some godlike figure. Nobody judges us or punishes us. The reality is that we punish ourselves. If you are a serial-killing cannibal and love it, after death you will gravitate to areas populated by other serial-killing cannibals. This may sound great, but a few hundred years of being eaten alive by other people of the same persuasion as yourself is punishment in itself, and allows you to see things from the victim's perspective. After a while, this tends to override the cannibal's joy in being able to continually indulge in his favorite activity. Eventually, the cannibal rejects this mode of thought and frees himself from it, allowing him to gravitate to something better. Focus 3 can